a day of unprecedented violence unfolded at the heart of American democracy. The world watched in shock and disbelief as a mob of Donald Trump supporters pushed past police barricades, scaled the walls of the Senate and stormed the Capitol building to stop the confirmation of Joe Biden's presidential election victory. A 35-year-old woman, an Air Force veteran, was shot and later died. 3 other people died after suffering medical emergencies on Wednesday night. Members of Congress were evacuated and a curfew was placed on the District of Columbia. But hundreds of Trump supporters refused to budge from the streets. The confirmation went ahead later, and Trump finally had to accept the outcome of the November 3rd election and committed to an orderly transition on January 20th. His party also lost 2 Senate seats in Georgia as the runoff races that took place on Tuesday gave way to the Democrats, giving them full control of Congress and the White House. So it looks like the winds of change are blowing to make way for Joe Biden's government, which will assume office in less than 2 weeks. But the nation remains devastatingly divided, as the chaotic scenes from this week has proven. We discussed the latest in US politics this week with Alexa Bankert, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Georgia. We also welcome Mark Shanahan, Professor and Head of Department for Politics and International Relations at the University of Reading and editor of the Trump Presidency. Thank you, first of all, to both of you for joining us at a very busy time in US politics. And, well, I want to start with you, Dr. Bankert. Now, the US presidential election was supposed to be over on November 3rd, and any questioning of the results by December 14th. But there's still a stark division in the country that's been inflamed to this point by the sitting president himself, Donald Trump. Now, what is the atmosphere like right now across America's political circles, and what do you think needs to be done for the nation to really move forward from this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Those were definitely interesting few days for American politics. Yesterday, we definitely saw an assault on the very foundation of every democracy, namely the peaceful transition of power after a fair and legitimate election. And I think most Americans here are quite shocked, even though what happened on the Capitol yesterday was, if you ask me, a logical conclusion of the past 4 years. And for the nation to move forward, I think Americans need to reckon with the past 4 years. American history tends to forget collective traumas rather than actually dissect them to see what happened and why and how it can be prevented from happening again. So I think Americans need a national discourse on what kind of society they want to be and a renewed commitment to democratic norms and values.
So with Biden taking office on January 20th, while that means a new page in American history, it doesn't mean that we should forget what happened for the last 4 years. And Dr. Shanahan, the violence at Capitol Hill, it was very shocking for the world to see. And of course, government leaders across the globe, they condemned the violent protesters, and they also called for a peaceful transition of leadership. How do you think this spark of violence, followed by weeks of President Trump denying the outcome of the presidential election, has really affected America's image or standing in the international community?
It doesn't feel as though America is the city on the hill anymore. It's not the country that the rest of the world is aspiring to be. And it probably hasn't been for a while. We've looked askance at Trump over the last 4 years. He was a figure of fun, of curiosity, and far too few people saw the real danger that his time in the White House has brought to America. Now, his international relations have been unusual in the extreme. He's aligned himself with autocrats, visiting Kim in North Korea, meeting in Singapore with him there, just one of the examples of this. I think we were all looking forward to the return of some normality in terms of policy with Biden's arrival in the White House. This is very shocking, and I guess the rest of the world is really looking now to America and very much worrying about what the next 13 days will bring.
And Dr. Shanahan, what do you think it is about Donald Trump that still really resonates with his hardcore supporters? And what do you think is needed, what do you think is necessary to overcome this division in American politics? Do you think Joe Biden and his team will be capable of achieving that?
Big questions. Trumpism doesn't just go back to 2016 or 2015 when Trump arrived on the scene. You can look a lot further back. You can look at Sarah Palin as a prospective vice president running when Obama ran in 2008 as fomenting that populist zeal and populist feel from people in America who felt that they had been left behind and left outside by the elites who run Washington, by normal politicians as we would see them, who feel very, very different from those folks in Tennessee or Kansas or in those states that are a long way from the coasts where policy gets made. They flocked to Trump because they liked the simple messages, the build the wall, drain the swamp, lock her up when they were talking about Hillary. These were simple slogans that resonated. And for the last 4 years, he's gone on Twitter 30, 40 times a day, given out simple messages. Some have stuck, some have not, but people have believed them. Even though the Washington Post, for instance, has said that he has lied 25,000 times in office. But he seemed to offer a message that says, I'm an outsider, you're outsiders, let's work together. It's fallen apart for him now. He even seems to be dumping those people who came to protest in Washington yesterday, who stormed the Capitol. Biden's got to have some kind of policy that heals the divide. That isn't easy, even though he has all three major levers of government now. He's got a wafer-thin majority in the Senate. And he has got to offer some kind of hope, but that delivers for Joe and Jessica, ordinary Americans in Tennessee and in Kansas, who see the pandemic being dealt with, who see an economic recovery and feel part of that recovery. Absolutely not going to be easy at all.
And of course, Joe Biden has been saying that he aims to heal the nation with more unity, especially in government. And Dr. Banker, meanwhile, in your state of Georgia, the world was, there were drum rolls as the world waited for the results of the two Senate runoff races that were held earlier this week. And of course, we saw Reverend Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff take both seats from the Republican incumbents. So what does this Democrat victory mean for the state of Georgia, which was very traditionally a red state?
Yeah, so this really comes with significant changes for Georgia. I mean, first of all, Georgia is now a battleground state, and that means we actually have competitive elections here. And if we know anything from prior research, it is that if you live in a competitive state, you're actually much more likely to be politically interested, to be engaged with politics. So this might be one of the very first benefits of seeing Georgia as an increasing battleground state here in the US. Policy-wise, it's important to note that Georgia is still under Republican leadership, right? So this Senate election is more of an indicator that Georgia is changing demographically, especially, and that the Republican Party needs to return to the center if they want to maintain their power.
And Dr. Shanahan, what do you think it was about the two Democratic candidates that enabled them to beat the two incumbents, a feat not achieved in 20 years in the state of Georgia? What does that tell us about what voters want?
I think in terms of the two characters who emerged on the Democrat side as candidates, Reverend Warnock, he's from the church where Martin Luther King is a previous incumbent in the preacher's role there. He was well known, he had good recognition. He's relatively radical in terms of the people who have been elected to the Senate this time round. Jon Ossoff, very different, very young, a journalist by background with a production company. But they were up against two very straightforward, straight-laced business people on the Republican side who were not God's gift to electoral races. Kelly Loeffler had not been elected, she'd been appointed to her role. So decent candidates helped. The fact that they had people like Stacey Abrams working for them, getting the vote out, getting people who don't normally vote in this kind of runoff election, the African American community, young people. And then they were able to take a big vote in, as Alexa says, in the demographically changed parts of Georgia. In the suburbs, they took a significant suburban vote away from the Republicans. And of course, the guy who's on the shelf behind me back there helped the Democrats greatly. Trump came down and he campaigned as recently as Monday night in the state of Georgia. But I mean, frankly, he might as well have been in the state of denial because he didn't help his candidates at all and probably really damaged them. It was kind of go vote, but don't vote because these guys are terrible. But actually, they're not terrible. So it was all such mixed messages. So decent candidates, getting the right votes in the right place, and having Trump, as he disintegrates, campaigning, all got these guys into office.
Right, it only took the president about 7 seconds for him to mention the electoral counts again. But Dr. Bankert, now that there's a rather even split in the Senate, will this make it easier for the two parties to reach common ground on some of Biden's key policy agendas, or do you think we're going to see more deadlocks over the legislations? What are some items on Biden's agenda that you think will perhaps get a strong boost from the Democrats' Senate victory?
No matter which party has the majority in the Senate, enacting major laws in the US will always be difficult. And that is because of the decades-old Senate rule that requires 60 votes for most types of bills to overcome legislation stalling filibuster. But the stakes were high, nevertheless. So this victory for Democrats is still meaningful because the stakes include whether the bills are even debated on the Senate floor, whether Biden can easily appoint judges, cabinet members, or ambassadors, and whether his administration will have to deal with congressional investigations. So from this perspective, it has gotten much easier for Democrats to govern. And I think Biden hopes to introduce lots of major legislations, including a public option for healthcare, reforms to political ethics and financing rules, immigration reform, but also to re-engage and reassure international allies and institutions, as well as probably a new approach towards China and I think Iran. So I'm hopeful that after this common trauma of being under assault on Capitol Hill, that lawmakers might be more willing to step away from the very divisive rhetoric and actually demonstrate their constituents that bipartisanship is not a dirty word, and that the mutual respect for each other is in fact a cornerstone of every democratic society.
And Dr. Shanahan, from the international community's perspective, with the Democrats in control of both houses and the White House, what developments do you hope to see in US foreign policy?
I pick up very much on where Dr. Bankert has been speaking about. It's a return to norms. It's a return to working with countries rather than working against them. I'm sure Biden will actually take a rather stronger and less positive view of autocrats around the world. He won't be making friends with North Korea, I don't think, anytime soon, but he may be normalizing relations with China, still being very strongly working against Chinese overreach, but doing it in a way that is more towards the norms of international relations. I think he will strengthen NATO. He'll be looking for partners to work together, but it won't all be about the cost all the time. I think he's going to be stronger on human rights, something that never really interested Trump. There won't be so many friendly handshaking trips to Saudi Arabia, I don't think. But also, it's things like climate change, the return to the Paris Treaty, and also the return to the World Health Organization, actually making America play its recognized place in the world and not treating everything as a bilateral business arrangement.
And Dr. Bankert, well, as for the Republicans, it looks like it's going to be a long time of soul searching for them. What's next for the Republican Party after Trump leaves the White House on January 20th?
Yeah, I think we're all wondering that right now. I know that Representative Adam Kinzinger from Illinois, he became the very first Republican lawmaker to call for invoking the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office. Right, so Section 4 of the 25th Amendment would allow Vice President Pence and a majority of cabinet members to vote to install Pence as president for the remaining 2 weeks of Trump's term. And before the storming of the Capitol, there were 13 Republican senators that planned to object to the election results. And I think there were also over 100 Republican representatives from the House. Some of them have changed their minds after the insurrections, but others try to assign the blame to the left, claiming that people in the mob weren't actually Trump supporters, but they were members of the violent terrorist group Antifa. And we know, in fact, from a Snap poll from YouGov that among Republican voters, 45% approved of the storming of the Capitol. Think about that number, 45% approved of the storming of the Capitol. So it remains to be seen whether the Republican Party will remain the party of Trump or whether they, in fact, return to the political center with principled conservatism and not Trumpism.
So a lot of questions there for the Republican Party and its future. Well, this is where we're going to have to end the discussion today, but that was Alexa Bankert, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Georgia, and Mark Shanahan, Professor and Head of Department for Politics and International Relations at the University of Reading. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you for watching.